Everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is reviewing and refining your organizational strategy. I'm Pete Johnson, Head of Income Generation at ACEVO, and I'll be chairing today's session. Now, we know as not-for-profits and charities, we're fundamentally in the business of change, whether it's transforming lives, influencing policy, or shifting systems. And to do that well, we need a clear, shared strategy that not only sets out the direction, but also brings people with us. We're living in a fast-changing, ever-evolving world. Today's session will build on some key themes: building blocks and methodologies for effective strategic planning, how to involve stakeholders in meaningful ways through that process, and how to make your strategy as outcome-focused as possible. Our speakers today are David Bull, an independent consultant with Action Planning, and Andrew Johnson, who's marketing and fundraising consultant, both with Action Planning. Now, some general housekeeping before we get underway. If you do need a transcription service, we are using Zoom's transcription, which can be found at the bottom of the screen. Please use the chat to comment throughout the presentation, but when it comes to Q&As, please use the Q&A box, and we'll go through that towards the end of the session. Now, for the format, our presenters will speak for about 40 minutes. We'll then break into Q&A. Okay, and that's the sort of general housekeeping underway there. David, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, I think it's Andrew first, isn't it?
My apologies. Andrew, over to you, of course.
No problem. Thanks, Pete, and welcome everybody today to top tips on how to review and refresh your organizational strategy. Before we start and do some introductions, we're just quite keen to hear a bit about yourselves. So I think our colleague Rachel from ACEVO will hopefully put live just a couple of questions at the beginning, a poll, just to get an idea of where you are in your organizational strategy journey and what you think are your main challenges to developing a new strategy. So if you could take a minute or so just to have a look at these two questions, choose the option that's most relevant for you, and then we'll have a quick look at the results, and then we'll get into the main part of the session. But just really good to get an idea of where you are at the moment in terms of developing and reviewing and refining your strategy. So we'll leave that on there for another maybe half a minute. Great. So, Rachel or Pete, do we have most of attendees completing that?
We do. The results will appear shortly.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. So we can see here that 40% are maybe at the starting blocks, really, in terms of starting to think about how to review, refine and develop the new strategy. 19% have done some initial thinking, about a quarter are already in the process, and just a small number, sort of just over 10%, have actually completed the process in terms of where you're at the moment. In terms of main challenges, finding time and capacity to embark on the process is a key one. Knowing how to approach it. Another big one here is obviously around getting trustees and staff involved, but ensuring it's not burdensome. So actually, when we come to talking about the consultation side and how and sort of who to involve in the process of developing your strategy, I think that would be really important. But obviously, we've got over a third who say all of the above. They're all challenges for us as kind of developing strategy. So that's just really helpful for us to kind of get a view of where you're at the moment. So action planning, if you've not heard of action planning before, we work a lot with ACEVO. We really enjoy working with Pete and the team at the events and webinars like this. Action planning, we're a community really of consultants right across the UK. We're a sort of gang of strategists, governance experts, fundraisers, So a whole mix of our colleagues right across the UK. We've all been there and sort of worked in organizations. Many of us have been CEOs, heads of, directors of various not-for-profits and charities. So we really work and come alongside not-for-profits and charities to help them with a particular challenge. So myself, my name's Andrew. I've been with Action Planning for about 12, 13 years now. And most of the work I do is supporting organizations through that kind of process of developing organizational strategy. So coming alongside them and maybe giving an extra bit of capacity. It might be doing a lot of the consultation work on their behalf, working with trustees and the staff team there to get people involved. Sometimes it might be just being a bit of extra kind of support for the CEO in terms of, am I approaching this in the right way? So in recent times, I've been working with sort of more small, medium-sized organisations, a few homeless charities like the Passage and Groundswell in London, the National AIDS Trust, Council of Deans of Health, a refugee and migrant charity. So we'll share some of those examples as we go through. But I'll hand over to my colleague David now to do a quick intro.
Thanks, Andrew. So yeah, I've got 30 plus years experience as a CEO, including some of the biggest, highest profile charities in the UK, like Amnesty International and UNICEF. And since 2016, I've been working with Action Planning and independently as a consultant on a variety of issues, but mostly around strategy and a bit on governance, some advocacy, some leadership support and mentoring, helping organisations and leaders to solve the problems that they might be facing. I'm currently based on the Welsh border near Hay-on-Wye. It's good to see a few organisations from Wales here, and look forward to working with you. Thanks.
Thanks, David. So as I mentioned in the sort of intro, at Action Planning, we work with a whole range of different sort of size organizations to help them develop their organizational strategy. David and I worked together on a big project for an international NGO, SNV, who are based in The Hague, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, on their strategy actually up to 2030. So that was quite a big project because they're based all over the world. I've worked more recently on very, sort of much smaller organisations like Ramphel, who are based in Essex and sort of East London, and a couple of homeless charities based in London, the Passage and Groundswell. So really a lot of the work we do is coming alongside and supporting organisations, whether they're very small, kind of even sort of right up to kind of the larger INGOs across the world. So, but pretty much the approach that we recommend organizations to go through is similar to, it doesn't matter in terms of the size of the organization. It's just some kind of fundamental things to think about as you're developing strategy in terms of really thinking about how you can get that kind of consultation and co-design with both your internal audiences and external audiences, and how you can ensure that co-design strategy is really outcomes focused. So as Pete said, that's a real kind of focus for the session today. So I'll hand over to my colleague David, who will really sort of start right at the beginning. What exactly is strategic planning?
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Next slide. So I think the key questions you need to ask at the beginning of a strategic planning process, some of them you might think you already know the answers to and you've done work on in the past, but it's always good to review that. What's our purpose? Why are we here? What makes us unique and special? What kind of organisation do we actually want to be? How ambitious are we? What are our ambitions? What do we hope to achieve? And most importantly, perhaps, what needs to change? How is the world around us changing? And how do we need to respond to those changes that are happening around us? And at the moment, that so much seems to be about how you deal with uncertainty, because, the world we live in, you almost don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But I think as part of the strategy process, we need to make choices, and we need to make those choices based on some kind of understanding of the wider world and of our own organization, so that we can determine whether we're doing the right things, what things we might want to do more of or less of. So that's the broad picture. Next slide. So yeah, Andrew, this is you, I think, this one.
Yeah, I think the really important thing we wanted to get across today is your organizational strategy should really help you articulate what change you need to deliver for the audiences that you're working with. As Pete said at the beginning, as not-for-profits, we're all in the business of change. That's what we do. We're trying to kind of have that impact. So your strategy should really be focused around not really about the activities that you're doing or you want to do, but actually what are the outcomes and impact of those activities? And what is that change that you want and need to deliver for the people that you support and work with? And I think that's becoming increasingly important, particularly in a very competitive funding landscape where you're competing for trusts and foundations for every kind of pound from donors. People want to give to that change. They want to give towards outcomes and impact. So it's really important that your organizational strategy internally has that kind of approach of people really understanding what we want to achieve as an organization in terms of change, but most importantly, those external audiences, particularly funders who want to actually fund outcomes. So it's about how you can demonstrate and articulate through the strategy that you have about what direction are you going in. You understand that external world, and you've done that analysis. You're really clear about what your USPs are and what makes you different and what is unique. But most importantly, what change do you want to deliver over the next 3 to 5 years to really have an impact in the space that you're working in? So if you take one thing from today, we really advise that strategy to be really outcomes focused in the language you use and how you articulate that to demonstrate and deliver that change.
Okay, thanks. So next slide. Yeah, I was in the little survey, it sounded as though there were quite a lot of challenges for people in finding the time and thinking through how to get started. And it can be a bit daunting, this process, because it looks like there's a huge amount to do, but you've got to start somewhere. So some of these simple questions would be a useful place to start. So how far ahead are we looking at planning? Most people do 3 years or 5 years. The SMV one we were talking about was, I think, 7 years looking forward. And start from reviewing your vision and mission. Everybody has those, I'm sure, but when did you last look at them? When did you last think about them? Do they still apply? Are they going to stand the test of time and change in the coming 3 or 5 year period? And what are our values? What do we believe in? And how is our culture as an organization? So to begin all that thinking, you need some kind of group, I think. So the CEO, one of the constraints you were talking about was you don't see how you can find the time to do this stuff. So I think you need to engage with other people. Quite often we find some kind of little steering group for the strategy is a useful place to start. Pick a few people representing different functions and levels in the organization who can sit down together and manage the process and make sure that everybody is engaged and involved. So who's leading and convening the strategy? That's an important question to answer right up front. And then those people can think about how we're going to engage the rest of the team and get everybody's thoughts and ideas to contribute. So next slide, Andrew, please. So yeah, we've kind of developed over the years an approach which we think works pretty well with these three phases. And this is an approach which is adaptable to organizations in all sorts of different sectors and all sorts of shapes and sizes. So, if you're a very tiny organization, or if you're a great big global one like SNV, you can use this approach. So the discover phase is about understanding your organization and the context in which it's working. And you may think you know your own organization pretty well. And we use this as consultants to understand the organization, but I think you can do it internally yourself as well, to ask questions and not take too many things for granted. And then the develop phase is about thinking through and analysing and working out what the key strategic questions are and how you might answer them and who needs to be consulted and so on. And phase 3 is the actual construction of the plan. Of course, phase 4 would be implementation, which we can also help with further down the line if need be, but that's not where we're going with this one today. So next, we're starting with that understanding phase. And the first part of that is understanding and mapping your external environment. Next slide, please. So this is perhaps the most important aspect of your strategy. It involves delving deeply into understanding your context and your own organization. Don't take anything for granted. Start with this external analysis. What do we think about the changes and challenges that we're likely to face in the next 3 to 5 years, or even longer? Thinking about the trends in society, in the world that might affect us in the coming years, including what we don't know and what kind of uncertainties we might face and how we can respond to those. Think about who you can ask. Who are the leading experts in your field who will understand the trends and the possibilities and the challenges ahead, and have a conversation with them. I found that most people are very willing to have those conversations and share their expertise. Take the long-term view, look at what other organizations in your sector are up to, how are they responding, what do they think about the challenges and changes. Depending on your relationships with your competitor organizations, you may be able to talk to them directly, but you can certainly look at their websites and their strategies and see what they're thinking. How are they responding to a changing world? We've got here the little diagram of PESTLE, which looks at the different kind of areas of external analysis that you might look at. And I think it's an aid to thinking, but it shouldn't be a straitjacket. So, I think in this phase, you've got to be flexible and think through, because all of these are related to each other. And while PESTLE is a useful tool, it's not the only way to think about the external environment. Next slide. So most of this is actually, when we talk about consulting here, we might be consulting the websites of your partners and competitors and funders and comparable organizations. We're looking at the literature. Most of this can probably be done by desk research, and it can be fairly simple and not take too much time, or as in the case of our project with SMV, it can be very thorough and detailed and take quite a lot of time. So, it's a bit as long as a piece of string, but it's really important that you put in a reasonable amount of effort to understanding your external environment, access relevant expertise, think about who the leading thinkers are in your area of work, ask them to gaze into their crystal balls and see what they think are the long-term trends, look at all the literature, and see if that, and also, of course, your own in-house expertise. But don't rely only on that, I think. So next slide. I mean, taking the AfriKids example, this is a small-ish NGO working on children's rights in northern Ghana. And out of the external analysis, we came up with a variety of issues that they felt were the ones that they really needed to grapple with in developing their strategy. So, you know, global issues like in the international development world, the big debate is about localization. How do we stop being a kind of colonialist approach and let the people in the countries where we work take the lead? Ghana, where they work, was doing really well, and a lot of aid donors were saying this is now a middle-income country, so we don't want to give money anymore. But despite that, there were some areas that were left behind and were still exceptionally poor and disadvantaged. So identifying the gaps in government programs where an NGO like AfriKids could make an impact, looking at global issues like climate change, technological change and so on. And of course, fundraising trends, so important in the international development context, big cuts in aid programs, trends like donors wanting people to work in consortia rather than applying for grants on their own. How can you approach corporates who are keen to show their sustainability credentials and so on? So, you know, these are the kind of questions that might emerge from your external analysis. Moving on to the next slide, in SMV, this is a big organization working in a whole load of different countries around the world. They were still looking at the impact of COVID, which is really important in a global context, and still having an impact in terms of cost of living, supply chains, and so on. Climate, aid cuts. One of their big questions was this one of fragile states. How do we work in places where there's conflict and governance isn't working, and it's really hard to find an institution or infrastructure with which to work, and then geopolitical changes and so on. So they had an immense amount of issues that were identified from the external analysis, which needed to be prioritized. Essentially, that process drove us towards defining a set of key strategic questions, which then allowed us to try to answer those questions as a key element in developing the strategy. So alongside that external analysis, you need to look at your own organization, the internal analysis. So next slide. How fit is your organization for the future that those external trends are going to bring to your organization? Are you going to be able to respond quickly and effectively as things change? How resilient are you as an organization? How well do you cope with the uncertainties that are coming? Is your organizational culture able to empower your people to respond as they might need to? Are your ambitions shared between all the people in your organization? Does your governance work well enough to meet the challenges that are ahead? Can you raise the funds? What needs to change in your own organization? So, you know, in terms of the strategy, it's no good saying we've got to respond to a changing world where there's not enough funding and there's increasing need, and people's livelihoods are affected by climate change and so on and so on. If your own organization is not actually in shape to address some of those issues that you're going to define in your strategy. So in most of our strategy work, I think we've found that we need an internal strategy as well as an external strategy. We need to understand what needs to change in our own organization in order to deliver the kind of changes that we want to for our beneficiaries and users. Okay, next. So out of that external and internal analysis comes a list of questions. These are the big strategic questions. So these questions will then form the basis for the next phase of consultation and engagement. So I'll just for the SMV example, I won't go through this list of questions, but I might tackle a couple of them. So for example, the agility question was, this is a large global organization, but things are changing rapidly in all the places where they work. How agile are they as an organization to actually be able to respond quickly and effectively when the unexpected happens? And I think their answer was probably not very. So we need to do something about that. So how does our organization need to change to make us more agile? Another one was the influencing question further down that list, which was, can we change the world in the way that we want to just by running wonderful programs for a community in Zambia? Or do we actually need to act at the regional or global or national levels to try to change policy and to influence what other people are doing who might have far more resources than we do? So that advocacy activity, how does that balance with our direct program delivery? Where do we put that balance and does it need to shift? And then the fragility question was one about, SMV is working with the poorest people and communities around the world. Where do those people live? Well, most of the poorest people actually live in contexts where it's incredibly difficult to work. They live in the middle of a war zone or in the middle of a place that's severely affected by climate change, flooding, desertification, and so on. The institutional frameworks to work in those situations are really difficult. The security challenges are immense. Should SMV change itself so that it's able to work in those fragile contexts, or should it build partnerships with other organizations that already have those skills? How is it going to deal with that question? So those are just three of the questions that we came up with that were really important. And the answers to those questions were fundamental to developing SMV strategy. Andrew, I don't know if you want to talk about the other two examples on this slide.
Yeah, thanks, David. Just briefly. So another example is the National AIDS Trust, who I worked with back in 2020 to develop their new strategy to 2025. I've actually just started working with them in the past month or two on their next strategy, which will go to 2028. But actually, really at the start of that, after that internal and external analysis and bit of that mapping, it's kind of really working with the trustees and the staff team there to look at, what are their big strategic questions. And those were some of these in terms of should they continue their focus around HIV or broaden their work out to broader sexual health? Should they continue that policy focus that they really specialize in or do more casework, particularly around litigation? Should they continue their UK focus or broader focus internationally for HIV rights and AIDS across the world? So that establishing those questions up front meant that when we go through the consultation and start to develop the strategy, we're ensuring that we're answering those questions. And a more recent one is Groundswell that I worked with last year on the development of their new strategy. And again, they're a homelessness and health charity based predominantly in London, but also have done projects in Manchester and other parts of the country. So their questions were around, do we focus around broader health inclusion, so not just homelessness? Also, or do we look at broader homelessness, so not just kind of street homelessness, but people who are kind of in stable housing, etc. So again, those are some of the strategic questions at the start to really think about and consider and ask those questions and discuss those with trustees and staff and the external consultation to really get a flavour for what direction should the organisation be going in the future, where should the focus be, where should the priorities be, and therefore what change should they be prioritising to really have that impact as a not-for-profit.
And I think those questions are absolutely central to the whole strategic planning process, and defining them as open questions, which you can then ask and consult about, is really important. Don't jump straight from the external and internal analysis to answers. Try and define what those key strategic questions are so you can have a proper internal debate about what the right answers might be. That's so crucial, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point, David. I did a facilitating the Way Day just before Christmas last year with a homeless charity called The Passage, based in Westminster, that I've worked with for many years. And actually, one of the first sort of tactics and exercises we did in the Way Day is getting the senior leadership team and trustees to really agree on those strategic questions. And as you expect, they started to try and answer those questions. But I really focused them around, well, let's just actually agree on what the questions are first. And then what you can do is through the consultation process, you can then start to get answers to those questions, not just from yourselves internally, but from your external environment. So you've got a really good rounded view of opinion on those questions in particular. So I'll just briefly go through now. Some people raising how do we include and engage internal teams like trustees and the staff team, but also externally as well in terms of consult with different audiences. So I'll go through some of the types of things you can think about and do either yourself or use an organisation like action planning to help kind of facilitate either those away days or kind of different consultation surveys, etc. So in terms of internal, as David said, we do recommend that you set up maybe a small steering group in the beginning and get a good mixture of people involved in that. The things that we do perhaps is do one-on-one interviews with trustees and senior leadership team. Sometimes that's really good to do kind of one-on-one interviews to get, in a very honest and open way, to get that individual opinion from trustees and senior leadership about how they see the future, the external world, and the challenges for the organisation. Or you could do a simple survey that goes out to your trustees and senior leadership or the whole team. So I've used that tactic before for National AIDS Trust and for the Refugee and Migrant Charity, just to have some simple questions at the beginning for those internal teams to answer some of those bigger questions that we've kind of identified at the start of the process. A really great way to get people involved is by having something like an away day. I often recommend bringing trustees and the staff team together. So with the Refugee and Migrant Charity, we had a brilliant sort of session, I think it was last May, where we got everybody together for the day. It's a really good opportunity actually to get all of the staff team working with trustees, getting them interacting with each other, separating them into groups. So actually you've got a really good opportunity to get that nice engagement between trustees, senior leadership team and staff. So we really recommend away days to kind of think through some of those questions and get that sort of input from teams. You might have actually teams right across the country or across the globe where it's really difficult to get everybody together in one place on an away day. So what we did, for example, with SMV, we designed some toolkits for then individual teams to use themselves. So those toolkits might have suggested activities when they're having their regular team meetings, perhaps putting half an hour aside to chat about strategy and to chat about some of the questions that we've identified. So that's an example where you can maybe create a little toolkit for some of your teams so that when they have their regular team meetings, they can use some of those tools and activities and then feed the information back to you, essentially to your steering group. So that's quite a good way if it's quite hard to bring all your organization together, or you've got people in quite disparate places, or people are really busy, they haven't got time to take out for an away day, but they already have a team meeting every 2 weeks for an hour and a half, 2 hours. So perhaps you could give them some tools and activities to actually do with their teams, and it make it simple for them to feed that all back to the steering group as part of that internal analysis. In terms of external, I think the most important thing is thinking about how you consult and engage and include all those people that you're working and supporting in your not-for-profit or charity. Many of the organizations I've worked with in the past couple of years have what's called a experts by experience advisory group, or a lived experience group, or kind of a number of different groups, or advisory group, or so I think first of all, think about the people you support, and maybe some of those audiences and how you might engage with them. Again, this could be through a survey. You could do a simple online survey using SurveyMonkey or Google Forms. Ask some simple questions to those external audiences and those people that you're supporting. I've used before things like I work with a charity working with parents of children with very rare diseases. It's really hard to get them to kind of commit their time to engage. So we actually did some discussion groups on Facebook, where I posted a question in that sort of parents group on a Friday evening, on a Saturday morning, on a Saturday afternoon, on a Sunday morning. So those parents, when they had time, could really give us some sort of insights into some of the challenges they're facing as a parent or child with a rare disease. So Facebook groups are a really good way of doing that. Surveys, maybe one-on-one interviews. You can see the picture on the right here. This is when I worked with the refugee and migrant charity. I trained up some of their volunteers just to ask some simple questions at one of their food banks to people who are coming along. What matters most to them? What are they most concerned about? So the types of questions here for your external audiences and for your beneficiaries, as you might call them, will be different perhaps then to the questions that you might put to your donors or funders. We recommend that you might sort of reach out to donors and funders again by a survey, or doing some one-on-one interviews with some of your funders. That's often the work that I do, because organizations find it better to have an external person to interview their funders, so that those funders can give a kind of a very honest and open view of the organization, and input into the strategy. There's lots of technology you can use if you're doing those on Zoom or on video calls. I've used these before, like Miro or Mural. Lots of different ways you can use kind of polling, quizzes, surveys. You can obviously get that all the discussions transcribed via Otter AI is one of the tools that I use. Obviously, Zoom has a transcription service, so it's much more simple to kind of have a discussion with people, capture the notes, and then bring all those notes together. It's so much easier and simple these days to actually get out there and speak to people, but most importantly, listen to those audiences, but easily capture their comments and input to develop your strategy. So once you've done that consultation and you've looked at how you can reach out to the people that you're looking to support, but also the funders and donors that are supporting you to really help you answer those strategic questions, the next stage is then to kind of analyze all that information and really use that to ensure that you're co-designing a strategy going forward for the organization.
Thanks, Andrew. So I found that it's really useful to try to actually before you get bogged down in the vast amount of information that you've got, through all the analysis and consultations that you've done up to this point, hopefully in your mind as a leader, things will start to come together, and you'll start to think, yeah, I think what our central objective as an organization in the next 5 years, it's going to have to be X. And I found that something comes together in your mind, and maybe with a consultant help as well, and you start to realize what it is. So in the AfriKids example, the the thing that emerged was they wanted to focus on children's rights in Ghana, but they wanted to have a wider impact. And they only work in a small area in the north of Ghana. So how could they have an impact on the rest of Ghana and on the wider world in terms of children's rights by doing the small scale things that they do with their limited resources in one district? So we came up with this idea as Ghana as a beacon for children's rights. Could they use their programs to demonstrate how to actually, what's best practice? How can you really tackle improving children's rights in a poor and disadvantaged part of Ghana? And so out of that emerged a strategy which was about demonstration districts. So identifying which districts of Ghana were particularly facing children's rights problems and challenges. And they're creating this kind of league table based on that analysis, and then focusing on the ones where the challenges were perhaps greatest and saying, can we pick a district and then use all our services and capacities to demonstrate that even in one of these challenging areas, it's possible to really make a difference on a small scale in one district, and then take that through advocacy and influence to other districts and other organizations that work elsewhere in the country and elsewhere in the world to say, you know, we can achieve this. So that was the approach. In the SMV case, it was really about aligning things to the Sustainable Development Goals, looking at which goals were most important to SMV, and seeing how the systems that operate in the countries where they work can be adjusted to make this work better. So it was, we then tried to come up with a graphical representation which tries to represent what the strategy might look like. So in this AfriKids example, you can see the central objective in the middle, Ghana as a beacon for children's rights, and then the methods of their operation, building partnerships, delivering programs, advocating for change, engaging the community in their demonstration districts. So those were their methods, and then the enablers of how they did that. Sorry, Andrew, can you go back one for a second? Yeah. So and that was about a lot of the internal stuff. So in order to do that, they needed to make some changes in the way they operated as an organization. And then we went into a bit more detail in each of those. So yeah, on the SMV one next, this was their core areas of work: agriculture and food, water and energy, and then those key cross-cutting issues identified: climate, governance and gender. How can we then use influence and transform the systems to deliver the sustainable development goals in the areas that we're most interested in? So I think that being able to then summarize your strategic approach on one piece of paper is very helpful. Then of course you can you need to go into all the details of how that's actually going to work in practice. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll come in now, David. Yeah, so this is
Yeah.
an example with the charity I worked with last year, Groundswell, the homelessness charity. It's really, there's a lot of detail underneath this, but it's really trying to really clearly articulate the change that they're trying to achieve, particularly to those funders in that competitive environment. So actually all of their work is around creating positive change, but the core goals were around stronger voices, actually making sure that the voice of those people with experience of homelessness is heard. Actually, a lot of their work and their activities are all about creating healthier lives and addressing the problem around homelessness and ill health. But actually the way they work and actually including and engaging people who have experienced homelessness to support other people like them, gave them skills and opportunities and actually gave them a better future. So this kind of graphic and this really simple way of articulating the future strategy around healthier lives, stronger voices, better futures is already helping them with their kind of direction going forward. And actually, the great news is they're now at stage 2 with a very big national lottery bid.
Andrew, I don't know if you saw that we're running out of time, so maybe we need to whiz through the rest pretty quickly so that we can get some questions in.
We're pretty much at the end now. So obviously that's the kind of simple representation. And then it's all about bringing together the strategy itself, having a bit of final consultation and adjustments, checking that vision and mission and maybe adapting that, as David said at the beginning, and then really thinking about the actual implementation in terms of, do other things need to change, like your name, strapline, brand, and then it's about presenting and getting that board sign off. And then once you have that, it's then much more around a communications plan and operationalizing that strategy and keeping it live so it's not just on the shelf. So hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the tools and methodologies and techniques to kind of get to developing that final strategy. And yes, I'm conscious of time. So I'll just, in terms of the time it takes to go through those phases, that can be anything from 2 to 4 months to kind of 6 months to a year. And actually, ourselves at Action Planning, if you need any sort of extra help or capacity or having that independent voice, do get in touch. My email is on the screen there, and I think we'll be sending the slides out after the session as well. So Pete, I'll hand over to you to kind of open for any questions.